skeptics have no philosophy of life because they have no philosophy of death.
And he says to me, there's actually nothing wrong with your carburetor. And so I say, well, then why do I need to buy a new one? And he says, well, to extend the warranty on your engine. And I say, okay, so do I need to buy a new engine to extend the warranty on my upholstery? So much for the good deal on my car.
It was a good deal for the dealer.
Yeah.
I got a good deal on this necklace.
Oh, it's very nice.
Thanks, I got it in New York.
Really? When were you there?
Just got back today, actually.
You must be tired. Traveling is so tiring.
Oh, I'm managing to stay fresh.
I'm a little tired myself. I shot 18 holes today. Shot at them, rather. How about you? What'd you do today?
I went to a funeral.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, no need to apologize.
Oh, I mean, I'm sorry. Was it someone close?
A friend.
That's too bad.
What do you suppose happens to us after we die?
Well, I'm sure your friend is in a much better place.
Why are you sure of that?
Oh, looks like I need a refill.
He was just trying to comfort you. You didn't have to make him feel so awkward.
Why is it so awkward to talk about death?
No one wants to talk about death.
Why not? I mean, we're all gonna die, aren't we? Why does nobody want to talk about it? And if we're all so sure we're going to a better place, why are we all so afraid of death?
Well, no one wants to die.
That's interesting, isn't it?
What a killjoy.
Who, me? Or him?
We were having an interesting conversation here, and then you bring up death.
Your conversation wasn't interesting at all. Death is interesting. And yet, no one's interested by it. In fact, you know what I think?
G.K. Chesterton was often accused of being paradoxical, and, well, he often was paradoxical, but he wrote about ultimate things, and ultimate things are paradoxical. The big truths are much more than we expect them to be, and they are so big that they seem to contain contradictions. And few subjects are bigger, more ultimate, more paradoxical than death. Chesterton says, death is the most obvious and universal fact, but also the least agreeable one. No one wants to talk about death, and yet it should be the topic most worth discussing. Why? Well, not because death itself is so important, but because of what happens after death. Chesterton tells us truly, nothing is important except the fate of the soul. Perhaps the main reason that no one wants to talk about death is that it is a religious subject. It seems that we're always trying to avoid death, and it also seems like we're always trying to avoid dogma. Is there a connection? According to G.K. Chesterton, yes. Death is a dogma. After all, there is no doubt about death. No modernist can make death discussable. No evolutionist can make death vague. No Hegelian can make death life. Nature has dramatic strides as well, and the serpentine's slow approaches. King Edward was not partly dead on Friday, and faintly alive on Saturday. He was alive, and then he was dead. Death is not a curve. It is a corner. All death is sudden death. There is an instant at which a man might answer a whisper, and there is a second instant at which he could not answer all the trumpets of the world made perfect. There is something both objective and subjective about death. Chesterton says,
Death is a positive and defined condition, but it belongs entirely to the dead person. Again, as with death, so with dogma. There is something that is both subjective and objective about it. Our decision to believe may be personal and, of course, something that we experience for ourselves, but the truths that we embrace are universal and very real. However, these great and mystical truths are often dismissed as being only subjective, something made up, something existing only in our minds. But would we really make up things like the fear of death? Have we merely invented the dogma of the immortality of the soul? Are sin and guilt and contrition just in our heads? According to G.K. Chesterton, no.
Humility and the fear of death and the fixed dogma of immortality are all objective. One of them is even objective in the sense of objectionable. Not one of them is a thing we make up to please ourselves. Humility is having the courage to know that you are not so fine a fellow as you feel. Death is the last thing anyone would invent out of mere self-importance. And immortality is a supernatural dogma, or it is nothing. The objective truth exists, not only outside ourselves, but sometimes in spite of ourselves. They are not things men imagine merely for pleasure. Death and humility are very different, but they are both things that many find it hard to accept. The faith and the fall are even antagonists, but our natural selves are rather reluctant to believe that a strain in human nature is wrong, or that the authority of a church is right. Both have grand mysteries of consolation behind them, but both are too purely objective to be merely optimistic. No man merely wants to believe he is infected with original sin, and no man merely wants to submit to the discipline even of an army that will save the world. Primarily, we accept these truths because they are true, certainly not merely because we wished them to be true.
If we continue to examine this surprising connection between death and dogma, we will see that the converse of this ultimate reality of death is the reality of life. And there's a dogma connected to life as well, a dogma that we naturally accept. And that dogma is that life is better than death. Chesterton gives us an example to show that we accept it. We say that a cat gets the better of a mouse because we hold the dogma that life is better than death. Unless, of course, the mouse has read too many books by German pessimist philosophers, in which case he would think that he had won the race by getting to the grave first. And as absurd as that sounds, it is actually a problem in the modern world. We live in a culture of death, where there's so much despair that death is often preferred to life.
Our generation, in a dirty, pessimistic period, has blasphemously underrated the beauty of life and cravenly overrated its dangers.
In his great novel, The Man Who Was Thursday, Chesterton says, the worst criminal in the world today is the modern philosopher who hates life itself, his own as much as everyone else's. Chesterton describes the culture of death long before Pope John Paul the Great gave the modern world that title. Chesterton saw it coming, and his writing shows us how the culture of death infects today's art and entertainment, our education, our economics, our politics, and our theology. He shows how obviously different things would be in all aspects of our society if we embraced a culture of life rather than a culture of death. We're going to take a look at these differences, and we'll start with the obvious one, abortion. Chesterton prophetically describes abortion as a more than usually barbaric form of birth control. It is baby killing, and he says it should be called by its own name, which is murder at its worst. Not only the brand of Cain, but the brand of Herod. And he urges us to protest against it, and the protest should be full of the honor of men, of the memory of mothers, and of the natural love of children. Amazingly enough, it was over 90 years ago when he said this. The defenders of the unborn call themselves pro-life, while those who defend abortion call themselves pro-choice. Their two different philosophies are implied in these titles. One side says life is always worth living. The other side says that it is not. One side says that death is evil and must be avoided. The other side says that life can be evil and that death is a way out. The irony, of course, is that those who are pro-choice are not defending the choice of the person being killed, but the choice of the person doing the killing. It is more philosophically sound to defend life than to defend choice, because life is a primary end and choice is a secondary means. Yes, we believe in liberty, we believe in free will, but what makes free will glorious is choosing what is right, what is good, and what is true. As Chesterton says, the only object of liberty is life. In his prophetic vision, Chesterton not only foresees what we would do to babies, but what we would do to people at the other end of life. He says the essence of euthanasia is that we murder people because we fear they may be a nuisance to themselves, but it's a short step to where we murder them because they are a nuisance to us. These are hot-button topics, of course, that quickly cause division in any political discussion, but Chesterton also shows how politics in general is infected by a dead, materialistic philosophy. We're always hearing, for instance, about the so-called swing of the pendulum, the idea that political trends must alternately go from one extreme to the other. Chesterton says that this is a denial of the whole dignity of mankind. When man is alive, he takes a stand. It's only when he's dead that he swings. Giving in to fashions and trends is not a sign of dignity or of freedom.
A dead thing can go with the stream, but only a living thing can go against it.
There is a clear distinction between the philosophy of life and the philosophy of death in our approach to science. There's a huge difference between the man who believes in the soul, in the sense of the will, and the man who only believes in scientific laws to explain all actions and interactions, all deeds, all behavior. It is a difference of kind, says Chesterton, like the difference between organic and inorganic matter, or in other words, between dead things and living ones. This dead and soulless philosophy has seeped into our language, into the way we talk. Chesterton points out how we speak of the outbreak of war as if all guns just blew up without men touching them. We do not speak of employers paying less or greater wages, which might pin the employers to some moral responsibility. Instead, we talk about the rise and fall of wages. We will not speak of reform, but of development. We avoid talking of love and lust, which are things alive, but instead we talk about the relations of the sexes, as if a man and a woman were two wooden objects standing in a certain angle and attitude to each other, like a table and a chair. Thus we will teach children how to avoid disease rather than how to value life. And we seem more concerned with health than with life. Sex has this same soullessness to it. It has become an exercise in avoiding disease and avoiding life. Perhaps the clearest distinction can be drawn between the culture of life and the culture of death in the difference between a suicide and a martyr. The modern world doesn't even understand the difference, sometimes thinking that the two are the same thing, or otherwise getting it backwards, admiring the suicide as somehow a dignified act, while dismissing martyrdom as deluded. G.K. Chesterton explains the difference.
Obviously, a suicide is the opposite of a martyr. A martyr, you see, is a man who cares so much for something outside of himself that he forgets his own personal life. A suicide, on the other hand, is a man who cares so little for anything outside him, that he wants to see the last of everything. One wants something to begin, the other wants everything to end. In other words, the martyr is noble exactly because he confesses this ultimate link with life. He sets his heart outside himself. He dies that something may live. The suicide, however, is ignoble because he has not this link with being. He is a mere destroyer. Spiritually, he destroys the universe.
In yet another comparison, or rather contrast, between the two opposing cultures that we're considering, Chesterton says, living things must constantly be broken up and destroyed. It is only the dead things that can be left alone. Which brings us to the Catholic Church. If the Church were dead, as so many people have claimed, there would be no need to attack it and try to break it up. If it were dead, it would be left alone.
People will tell you that theology became too elaborate because it was dead. Believe me, if it had been dead, it would never have become elaborate. It is only the live tree that grows too many branches.
So too tradition, which some call a dead thing, is something very much alive that outlives us and our mad little movements. Interestingly enough, one of the most important traditions in a sane society is the way we treat the dead. Funeral traditions are all about human dignity. Chesterton says that even in an empire of atheists, the dead man is sacred.
It is strange that even the materialists, who believe that death does nothing except turn a fellow creature into refuse, only begin to reverence that fellow creature at the moment that he has been turned into refuse.
And yet the modern cult of hygiene that prefers health to life has lost the ancient reverence for death that was shared with us even by atheists. Chesterton accurately predicts that the cult of hygiene would lead to an insistence on cremation rather than on burial. If the dying are a nuisance, the dead are even a greater nuisance. As a way of denying death, we deny the existence of the dead. We deny them their place. A cemetery reminds us that we will die. Scattered ashes we forget about. So too the word undertaker is a modern euphemism. Chesterton says it means that we need not think about such things because there's some slave who will undertake it. That is, who will take it away. The word mortician is even more modern and more euphemistic. It has a clean, clinical, scientific ring to it. But it still gets between us and the reality of death. We are not facing death, says Chesterton, because we are not facing life as it is. Life as it is something too splendid, too beautiful to be faced. Those who fear death most, says Chesterton, are those who have been blessed with the greatest worldly luxuries. Their pleasures do not please them. Their prosperity does not meet their needs. They keep running after fulfillment, and they keep running away from life, even as they're trying to run away from death. Why do we fear death? Chesterton says, it's not death we fear, but judgment. More specifically, it's not death we fear, but hell. Everyone is afraid of falling from a great height, and hell, says Chesterton, is an infinity of falling. There's a solution to this problem, you know. The gospel, the good news, is the promise of eternal life. We know we do not want to go to hell, which is eternal death. We know we want to go to heaven, which is eternal life. It is the reality of death that makes life so valuable, that points to our desire for eternal life. Chesterton says, life is always worth living while men feel that they may die.
It is the point of all deprivation that it sharpens the idea of value. And perhaps this is, after all, the reason of the riddle of death. In a better world, perhaps, we may permanently possess and permanently be astonished at possession. In some strange estate beyond the stars, we may manage at once to have and to enjoy. But in this world, through some sickness at the root of psychology, we have to be reminded that a thing is ours by its power of disappearance. With us, the prize of life is one great glorious cry of the dying. It is always morituri te salutant. We about to die salute you. At the four corners of our human temple of happiness stand a lame man pointing to one road, and a blind man worshiping the sun, a deaf man listening for the birds, and a dead man thanking God for his creation.
Chesterton says, life, after all, is much more dramatic than death. We alluded to the fact earlier that most of us do not want to discuss death because we do not want to discuss dogma. We do not want to face either of the great realities. But even though we admit that death is a reality, we do not want to admit religious reality. But it is real as death. More importantly, as real as life. Chesterton says religion is revelation. In other words, it is a vision, and a vision received by faith, but it is a vision of reality. The faith consists in a conviction of its reality. It's not a mythology, neither is it a philosophy. It is not a philosophy because, being a vision, it is not a pattern but a picture. It is not one of those abstract explanations that attempt to resolve everything with a simplification, that everything is relative, or everything is recurrent, or everything is inevitable, or that everything is an illusion. It is not a process but a picture. It is not a process but a story. It is as convincing as a picture or a story is convincing. In other words, it is exactly as the phrase goes, like life. For indeed, it is life. Jesus said that he came that we might have life, and have it more abundantly. Eternal life does not mean merely endless life, although it does mean that. It means life to the fullest, even life overflowing. It was God's great gift at creation, a gift destroyed by sin, but restored by Christ. It is sacred. Life is sacred. Chesterton says, more prophetically than he could have possibly known, that among all the cosmic creeds, the Catholic faith is the only one that is entirely on the side of life. But he also says that if we believe in the sanctity of human life, it must really be a sanctity, and we must make sacrifices for it. Paradoxically, we may be called, like Christ, to die on behalf of life. Chesterton says, perhaps one never knows what being a man means until the instant of death. All life is a learning to die. I'm Dale Ahlquist. Please join us again for the Apostle of Common Sense, and please support the American Chesterton Society. Help us make common sense more common.